Victoria Whitmore touched the soft leather of her first-class seat and smiled politely at the flight attendant who was adjusting her seatbelt. At 22, she had taken this same flight from New York to Los Angeles dozens of times, but she never got used to the bustle of airports and airplanes. The sounds were always overwhelming: rolling suitcases, crying babies, muffled announcements over the intercom. "Would you like anything to drink before takeoff, Miss Whitmore?" the attendant asked in that special voice people used when they noticed her white cane. "Just water, please," Victoria replied, her fingers finding the familiar position on her smartphone. She had memorized every button, every swipe pattern. Technology was supposed to make life easier for people like her, and in many ways it did. But sometimes she wondered what it would be like to see the screen instead of just hearing the robotic voice read everything aloud. Mrs. Patterson, her companion for the past 3 years, settled into the seat beside her with a soft grunt. The older woman was kind enough, but Victoria sometimes felt more like a valuable package being carefully transported than a person traveling with a friend. "The weather looks perfect for flying today, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, opening what sounded like a magazine. "Clear skies all the way to California." Victoria nodded and turned toward the window even though she couldn't see anything beyond it. This was just habit now. Her father always told her she had been born this way, completely blind from birth due to a rare genetic condition. He had spent millions trying to find a cure when she was younger, flying her to specialists in Switzerland, Germany, and Japan. Nothing worked. Eventually, he stopped looking for miracles and focused on giving her the best life possible within her limitations. And what a life it was. The Whitmore mansion in the Hamptons had been completely adapted for her needs. Raised pathways in the garden, voice-activated everything, and staff trained to help her navigate the world safely. Her father, Richard Whitmore, was one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs in the country. His company had revolutionized cloud computing, and he was worth over $2 billion. Money was never an issue, but sometimes late at night when the house was quiet, Victoria wondered what she was missing. She had read books about colors, about sunsets and rainbows, about the way light danced on water. People tried to describe these things to her, but she knew it was like trying to explain music to someone who had never heard sound. The plane began to move, and Victoria felt that familiar flutter in her stomach as they taxied toward the runway. She was going to Los Angeles for a charity event, another gathering where wealthy people would donate money to causes for the blind and disabled. Her father always brought her to these events. He said her presence reminded people why their donations mattered. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to take off," the captain announced. "Please make sure your seat belts are fastened and your tray tables are in the upright position." Victoria gripped the armrests as the engines roared to life. She actually enjoyed flying once they were in the air, but takeoff always made her nervous. The acceleration pushed her back into her seat, and she felt the moment when the wheels left the ground. They were airborne. About an hour into the flight, everything changed. The plane suddenly dropped what felt like several feet, throwing Victoria forward against her seatbelt. Drinks spilled, people screamed, and the overhead bins rattled violently. The pilot came on immediately, his voice calm but serious. "Folks, we've hit some unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, please take your seats immediately." Victoria's water bottle had fallen and was rolling around somewhere near her feet. Her purse had slipped off her lap, spilling its contents into the aisle. She could hear Mrs. Patterson muttering prayers under her breath while trying to gather scattered items. "I'll help you," said a voice Victoria didn't recognize. It was young, female, with a slight accent she couldn't quite place. "Oh, you don't need to," Victoria started, but the stranger was already moving around, collecting things from the floor. "No problem at all. Turbulence is scary enough without losing your stuff." The young woman's voice was warm and friendly. "I'm Keisha, by the way. I was just coming back from the bathroom when everything went crazy. I'm Victoria, and this is Mrs. Patterson." Victoria turned toward where she thought the voice was coming from. "Thank you for helping." Keisha handed Victoria her purse and helped Mrs. Patterson gather her magazines. "Are you okay? That was a pretty big drop." "I'm fine," Victoria said. "I'm used to not seeing what's coming anyway." There was a pause, and Victoria wondered if she had made the stranger uncomfortable. People never knew how to respond when she mentioned her blindness so casually. "You have really beautiful eyes," Keisha said finally. "They're this amazing green color like emeralds." Victoria felt her cheeks warm. People rarely commented on her appearance, and when they did, it was usually about how normal she looked. Thank you. I wouldn't know, obviously, but people have told me they're green. Have you always been... Keisha paused, searching for the right words. Blind? Yes, since birth. Genetic condition. Victoria recited the explanation she had given thousands of times. My father tried everything when I was little, but nothing worked. Keisha was quiet for a moment. Victoria could hear her shifting in the aisle, probably trying to decide whether to go back to her own seat or continue the conversation. What kind of genetic condition? Keisha asked. There was something different in her voice now, a curious tone that Victoria couldn't quite identify. I'm not sure of the exact medical name, Victoria admitted. Something with the optic nerves, I think. My father handles all the medical details. The plane had steadied now, and the captain announced that they were through the worst of the turbulence. Other passengers were starting to relax, conversations resuming around the cabin. That's interesting, Keisha said thoughtfully. I'm studying nursing, so I've learned a bit about different eye conditions. Most genetic blindness affects the retina or the optic nerve development. Victoria felt a strange flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the turbulence. No one had ever asked her these kinds of detailed questions before. Usually people either avoided the topic entirely or asked basic questions about how she managed daily tasks. Are you in school? Victoria asked, wanting to change the subject. Yeah, community college in Detroit. I'm actually flying to LA for a medical internship at UCLA. It's a huge opportunity for someone like me. Keisha's voice carried excitement and nervousness. This is my first time flying anywhere, actually. My mom saved up for months to help pay for the ticket. Victoria tried to imagine saving money for a plane ticket. She had never thought about the cost of travel before. Her father's private jet was usually available, and when it wasn't, first-class tickets were just another expense that appeared on bills she never saw. What kind of nursing do you want to do? Victoria asked. Pediatric nursing, maybe pediatric ophthalmology. I want to help kids who have vision problems. Keisha's passion was clear in her voice. There are so many conditions that can be treated if they're caught early enough. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes before Keisha reluctantly said she needed to get back to her seat and coach. The flight attendants were starting to give her looks for standing in the first-class aisle too long. It was really nice meeting you, Victoria, Keisha said. I hope you have a great time in LA. You too, Victoria replied. Good luck with your internship. As Keisha walked away, Victoria found herself thinking about their conversation. There had been something in the young woman's voice when she asked about the genetic condition, a note of curiosity that seemed professional rather than just polite interest. Mrs. Patterson leaned over. What a lovely young lady. Very well-mannered. Victoria nodded, but she was still thinking about Keisha's questions. Why had she seemed so interested in the medical details? And why did Victoria suddenly find herself wondering about things she had never questioned before? For the rest of the flight, Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that something important had just happened. She just didn't know what it was yet. Keisha couldn't stop thinking about Victoria as she made her way back to coach. Something wasn't right about what she had observed. And as a nursing student, she had been trained to notice details that others might miss. She squeezed past other passengers and finally reached her middle seat, between a businessman who was snoring loudly and a teenager with headphones blasting music. The contrast between first class and coach was stark. Cramped seats, no legroom, and the constant sound of babies crying. But Keisha was grateful to be on the plane at all. This internship at UCLA Medical Center was the opportunity of a lifetime. She had worked double shifts at a diner in Detroit for 8 months to save enough money for the trip. Her mother had contributed her entire tax refund, and her church had taken up a collection to help with living expenses. Everyone in her neighborhood was rooting for her success, but right now all she could think about was Victoria's eyes. Keisha pulled out her nursing textbook and flipped to the chapter on ophthalmology. She had always been fascinated by vision disorders, partly because her little brother had been born with a lazy eye that required surgery when he was 6. She had spent countless hours in hospital waiting rooms, watching doctors examine children with various eye conditions. What bothered her about Victoria was simple. Her pupils had reacted to light. When they were talking and the overhead reading light had flickered on and off due to the turbulence, Keisha had clearly seen Victoria's pupils contract and dilate appropriately. That shouldn't happen with congenital blindness caused by genetic optic nerve problems. She flipped through the pages, reviewing the different types of vision loss, retinal conditions, optic nerve damage, cortical blindness. Each had distinct characteristics. But Victoria's eyes looked healthy from the outside. More importantly, she seemed to navigate with unusual precision for someone who had never had sight. Keisha thought back to the conversation. Victoria had turned toward her voice each time she spoke, which was normal for blind people who relied on hearing. But there had been subtle moments when Victoria seemed to react to visual stimuli. The slight turn of her head when the flight attendant moved past with the drink cart. The way she had oriented herself toward the window even though she said she couldn't see anything. The nursing student in Keisha knew she might be overthinking things. She had only observed Victoria for a short time under stressful circumstances. But her instincts told her something was wrong with the story she had been told. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, Keisha watched Victoria and Mrs. Patterson disembark from first class while she waited for the crowd and coach to thin out. Victoria moved confidently with her white cane, but again there was something about her movement that seemed too fluid, too aware of her surroundings. Keisha almost let it go. After all, what business was it of hers? She was just a nursing student from Detroit, and Victoria was clearly from a completely different world. But as she collected her single carry-on bag and headed toward baggage claim, she couldn't shake the feeling that she might be the only person who had noticed something important. At baggage claim, fate intervened again. Victoria and Mrs. Patterson were standing near the carousel, waiting for their luggage. Mrs. Patterson was on her phone, apparently dealing with some kind of transportation mix-up. "Excuse me," Keisha approached them hesitantly. "I hope you don't mind me bothering you again. I just wanted to make sure you got your luggage okay." Victoria turned toward her voice with a smile. "Keisha, how nice to see you again." "Well, you know what I mean." Mrs. Patterson looked up from her phone with obvious frustration. "Our driver is stuck in traffic and the backup car service is running an hour behind. I'm trying to figure out alternative transportation." "I could help you get a regular taxi," Keisha offered. "I'm taking one anyway." "Oh, that's very kind. But we have specific arrangements," Mrs. Patterson said in a tone that suggested regular taxis were beneath them. "Actually, that sounds fine to me," Victoria said. "We're just going to the Beverly Hills Hotel. How hard can it be?" Mrs. Patterson looked horrified. "Victoria, your father specifically arranged for a car service that's equipped for your needs." "I think I can manage a regular taxi," Victoria said with a hint of irritation. "I'm not completely helpless." Keisha sensed tension between Victoria and her companion. She also noticed something else. When Victoria said she wasn't helpless, she had gestured slightly with her hand. It was a subtle movement, but it seemed to track with the direction of Mrs. Patterson's voice in a way that suggested spatial awareness beyond just hearing. "Look, I don't want to cause any problems," Keisha said. "But if you want to share a taxi, I'm happy to help. I'm staying near UCLA, so Beverly Hills is on the way." Victoria made the decision quickly. "That would be wonderful. Mrs. Patterson, you can take the car service when it arrives." "I'll be fine with Keisha." Mrs. Patterson protested, but Victoria was surprisingly firm. Within 20 minutes, the two young women were sitting in the back of a taxi, heading into the sprawling city of Los Angeles. "Thank you for rescuing me from that situation," Victoria said once they were alone. "Mrs. Patterson means well, but sometimes I feel like I'm being managed instead of helped." "I get that," Keisha said. "My grandmother had a stroke last year, and everyone in the family started treating her like she was made of glass. She hated it." As they talked, Keisha continued to observe. Victoria seemed to track the movement of buildings and lights outside the window, even though she claimed not to see them. When the taxi driver made sudden lane changes, Victoria braced herself slightly before the movement happened, as if she had seen it coming. "Can I ask you something?" Keisha said carefully. "When was the last time you had a comprehensive eye exam?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I'm not sure. My father handles all my medical care. He says the exams are traumatic and unnecessary since nothing can be done anyway. But don't you want to know exactly what's wrong? I mean, for your own understanding." "I suppose I've never really thought about it," Victoria admitted. "My father explained everything when I was younger. I trust his judgment." Keisha felt her heart rate increase. A young woman in her 20s who had never had recent eye exams. That seemed incredibly unusual, especially for someone with unlimited financial resources. "Victoria, I know this might sound strange, but would you be willing to meet with an eye doctor while you're here?" Just for a second opinion? Why would I do that? Victoria sounded genuinely puzzled. Because, Keisha took a deep breath. Because I've been studying vision disorders, and some things about your condition don't quite add up to me. Victoria turned fully toward her, and for a moment Keisha could have sworn she was being looked at, not just listened to. What do you mean? Your pupils react to light, Keisha said gently. Your eyes track movement. You orient yourself spatially in ways that suggest some level of visual processing. These things don't typically happen with congenital blindness caused by optic nerve problems. The taxi was quiet except for the hum of traffic around them. Victoria's face had gone pale. That's impossible, she said finally. I've been blind my entire life. My father wouldn't lie to me about something like that. I'm not saying anyone lied, Keisha said quickly, but medical understanding advances all the time. Conditions that were considered untreatable 20 years ago might have new solutions now. What if there's something that could help you? Victoria shook her head. My father spent millions when I was little. If there was anything that could be done, he would have found it. But what if something was missed? What if the original diagnosis was incomplete? The taxi pulled up to the Beverly Hills Hotel, its palm-lined entrance gleaming under afternoon sunlight that Victoria supposedly couldn't see. But as they stopped, Keisha noticed Victoria's slight squint as if the brightness was affecting her. I can't, Victoria said as they got out of the taxi. I can't question everything I've believed about myself. It's too scary. Keisha paid the taxi driver and helped Victoria with her small suitcase. I understand. But Victoria, what if you could see? What if you've been missing out on something that was always possible? They stood at the hotel entrance, two young women from completely different worlds, connected by a chance encounter and a mystery that neither of them fully understood yet. I'm going to be at UCLA Medical Center for the next 6 weeks, Keisha said. If you change your mind, if you want someone to go with you to see a doctor, just call me. She wrote her number on a piece of paper and pressed it into Victoria's hand. I won't change my mind, Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. As Keisha watched Victoria disappear into the luxury hotel with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just planted a seed that would change everything. 3 days passed before Victoria called Keisha. 3 days of lying in her luxury hotel suite, staring at the ceiling she couldn't see, thinking about questions that wouldn't go away. The charity gala had been the usual affair. Wealthy donors writing checks while listening to speeches about the importance of funding research for the blind. Victoria had sat at the head table, smiling politely as people talked about her courage and inspiration. But Keisha's words kept echoing in her mind. Your pupils react to light. Your eyes track movement. Victoria had always experienced strange sensations that she never mentioned to anyone. Sometimes she felt like there were shadows moving at the edges of her awareness. Sometimes she got headaches that seemed to come from behind her eyes, especially in bright places. Her doctors had always explained these as phantom sensations, the brain's way of trying to process signals that weren't really there. But what if they were real? On Wednesday morning, she finally picked up the phone. Keisha? It's Victoria. Victoria, I was hoping you'd call. How are you doing? I've been thinking about what you said. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. About seeing a doctor. I'm scared, but I can't stop wondering. There was silence on the other end, then Keisha's voice, gentle but excited. I've actually been doing some research. There's a doctor here at UCLA, Dr. Martinez, who specializes in complex vision disorders. She's supposed to be one of the best in the country. I don't know how I would explain this to Mrs. Patterson, or my father. You don't have to tell them yet. This could just be a consultation just to satisfy your curiosity. Dr. Martinez agreed to see you this afternoon if you're interested. Victoria felt her heart racing. This afternoon? I know it's sudden, but she had a cancellation, and when I explained the situation, she was really intrigued. She said she'd like to take a look. 2 hours later, Victoria found herself in the passenger seat of Keisha's borrowed car, heading toward UCLA Medical Center. She had told Mrs. Patterson she was going shopping with her new friend and would be back for dinner. The lie felt strange on her tongue. Are you okay? Keisha asked as they parked. You're really quiet. I'm terrified, Victoria admitted. What if you're wrong? What if this is all just wishful thinking? Then we'll know for sure and nothing will have changed, Keisha said. But Victoria, what if I'm right? The medical center was busy and loud. full of the sounds Victoria associated with hospitals: rolling gurneys, beeping machines, conversations in medical jargon. Keisha guided her through the maze of corridors to Dr. Martinez's office. Dr. Martinez was a woman in her 50s with a warm voice and gentle hands. She spent nearly an hour asking Victoria questions about her medical history, her symptoms, and her experiences. "Tell me about these headaches you mentioned," Dr. Martinez said, shining a small light that Victoria could somehow sense even though she supposedly couldn't see it. "They happen sometimes when I'm in bright places," Victoria explained. "My doctors always said they were phantom pain, not real." Dr. Martinez made notes. "And you've never had any sensation of light or shadow?" Victoria hesitated. She had never admitted this to anyone before. "Sometimes I feel like there are shapes moving around me, dark areas and lighter areas, but my father's doctor said that was my imagination trying to fill in gaps." "When was your last comprehensive eye examination?" "I'm not sure exactly. My father says they're too stressful and there's no point since nothing can be done." Dr. Martinez exchanged a look with Keisha that Victoria couldn't see, but somehow sensed. "Victoria, I'd like to run some tests. Nothing painful, just some basic examinations to understand what we're working with." The tests took over an hour. Dr. Martinez examined Victoria's eyes with various instruments, measured her responses to different types of light, and conducted several other procedures that Victoria didn't fully understand. Finally, Dr. Martinez asked Keisha to step out of the room. "Victoria, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Have you ever taken any medications regularly? Pills that your father or doctors gave you for your condition?" Victoria thought about it. "Yes, I take several pills every day. My father handles my medications. He says they help prevent complications from my condition." "Do you know what they are?" "Not exactly. Different colored pills. My father puts them in a weekly pill organizer for me." Dr. Martinez was quiet for several minutes, and Victoria could hear her typing notes into a computer. "Victoria, I want you to stay calm while I tell you what I found." Victoria's hands gripped the arms of her chair. "What is it?" "Your retinas appear to be completely functional. Your optic nerves show no signs of damage or developmental problems. The structures of your eyes are normal and healthy." "But that's impossible. I can't see anything." "You can't see because something is interfering with your brain's ability to process visual information. This is called cortical visual impairment." "But Victoria, this type of vision loss isn't usually genetic and it's often treatable." The room seemed to spin around Victoria. "I don't understand. Are you saying I should be able to see?" "I'm saying that the type of blindness you have is not what your father's doctors told you. And I'm concerned about the medications you're taking." Victoria felt sick to her stomach. "What do you mean?" "Some of the symptoms you described combined with what I'm seeing in your examination suggest that your visual processing might be being artificially suppressed." "Suppressed how?" Dr. Martinez chose her words carefully. "Victoria, I think someone has been giving you medications that impair your brain's ability to process visual information." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Victoria couldn't breathe. "That would mean," she started, then couldn't finish the sentence. "It would mean that your blindness might not be natural," Dr. Martinez said gently. "It might be induced." Victoria started to shake. "My father wouldn't do that. He spent millions trying to cure me. He loves me." "I'm sure he does love you," Dr. Martinez said. "But Victoria, I think we need to do more tests. And I think we need to find out exactly what medications you've been taking." Keisha came back into the room to find Victoria crying and Dr. Martinez looking grim. "What happened?" Keisha asked. "Victoria has cortical visual impairment, likely medication-induced," Dr. Martinez explained. "Her eyes are perfectly healthy. Her blindness appears to be artificial." Keisha sat down heavily in the chair next to Victoria. "Oh my God. I want to do blood work to identify what's in her system," Dr. Martinez continued. "And Victoria, I think you need to bring me those pills you've been taking." "I can't," Victoria whispered. "Mrs. Patterson keeps them. She gives them to me every morning and evening." "Then we need to get them without her knowing," Keisha said firmly. "Victoria, if this is true, if someone has been keeping you blind on purpose—" "It can't be true," Victoria said, but even as she spoke, she was remembering things. The way her father always insisted on handling her medical care personally, the way he discouraged her from asking questions about her condition. The way he seemed almost proud when people praised him for taking such good care of his disabled daughter. "I need those pills," Dr. Martinez said. "Can you get them?" Victoria wiped her eyes with shaking hands. "Mrs. Patterson always has them in her purse. She's very careful with them." "I'll help you," Keisha said. "We'll figure out a way." As they sat in that small examination room, Victoria felt her entire world crumbling around her. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her father, about her life, was suddenly in question. "If this is true," she said quietly, "how long would it take for my vision to come back?" "That depends on what medications you've been taking and for how long," Dr. Martinez said. "But cortical visual impairment can often be reversed if the underlying cause is removed. It might take weeks or months, but there's a good chance your vision could be restored." Victoria closed her eyes, a gesture that might soon have actual meaning. "I need those pills," she said. "I need to know the truth." The three women sat in silence, each understanding that they were about to uncover something that would change Victoria's life forever. The question was whether that change would set her free or destroy everything she had left to believe in. Outside the office window, the Los Angeles sun was setting in brilliant colors that Victoria had never seen, but might soon experience for the first time in her adult life. Getting the pills proved easier than Victoria had expected. That evening, she told Mrs. Patterson she had a headache and wanted to rest early. When the older woman went down to the hotel restaurant for dinner, Victoria used her detailed knowledge of Mrs. Patterson's routines to locate the small medication case in her companion's purse. Her hand shook as she felt for the familiar shapes of her daily pills. She took one of each type, carefully replacing the others so their absence wouldn't be noticed immediately. The pills felt ordinary in her palm, small, smooth, unremarkable. It was hard to believe these tiny objects might hold the key to 22 years of darkness. The next morning, Keisha picked her up early for another appointment with Dr. Martinez. Victoria had barely slept, her mind racing between hope and terror. What if the doctor was wrong? What if she was right? "I got them," Victoria said as soon as she was in the car holding out a small plastic bag. Keisha looked at the pills while driving. "I've never seen medications like these. They don't have any markings or brand names." At the medical center, Dr. Martinez examined the pills under a microscope and ran several preliminary tests. "These appear to be compound medications," she said. "Custom-made, not manufactured by a pharmaceutical company. I'm sending them to our lab for complete analysis, but Victoria, I want you to stop taking them immediately." "But what if stopping them makes me sick? Based on what I suspect these pills contain, stopping them should make you better, not worse." "But I want you to stay here at the medical center for observation." Victoria called Mrs. Patterson and told her she was spending the day with Keisha, visiting museums and getting a tour of Los Angeles. Another lie, but she was beyond caring about small deceptions when her entire life might be built on a massive one. The lab results came back that afternoon. Dr. Martinez called Victoria and Keisha into her office, her expression serious. "Victoria, these pills contain a combination of neurological suppressants," she said. "The primary ingredient is a compound that specifically interferes with visual cortex processing. In simple terms, these drugs are designed to prevent your brain from interpreting visual information." Victoria felt the room spinning. "So I really have been. They've been keeping me blind on purpose?" "It appears so. The good news is that these medications are reversible. Your brain and eyes are healthy. Once these drugs clear your system, your vision should begin to return." "How long will that take?" "Everyone responds differently, but I'd estimate a few days to a few weeks for significant improvement." Keisha reached over and took Victoria's hand. "Victoria, I'm so sorry. I can't imagine what you're feeling right now." Victoria was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "I need to confront my father." "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Dr. Martinez asked. "I'll never be ready, but I need to know why." That evening, Victoria called her father from her hotel room. Richard Whitmore was in New York, but he could be in Los Angeles by morning if needed. "Daddy," she said, struggling to keep her voice normal, "I'd like you to come to LA. There's something important I need to discuss with you." "Of course, sweetheart. Is everything all right? You sound upset." "Just please come." "And Daddy?" "Come alone. Don't bring anyone from the medical team or the staff." There was a pause. "Victoria, you're worrying me." "What's this about?" I'll explain when you get here. Richard Whitmore arrived at the Beverly Hills Hotel the next morning, looking concerned and slightly annoyed at being summoned across the country without explanation. Victoria met him in a private dining room she had reserved, with Keisha waiting nearby for support. "Victoria, what's going on?" Richard asked as soon as he saw her. "Mrs. Patterson said you've been acting strangely, spending time with some girl you met on the plane." "Sit down, Daddy." Something in her tone made him comply. Victoria had never spoken to him with such authority before. "I went to see an eye doctor," she said without preamble. Richard's face went pale. Why would you do that? You know those examinations are traumatic for you." "Dr. Martinez examined my eyes and ran tests on my medications." "Your medications?" Richard's voice had changed completely. "Victoria, those medications are specially formulated for your condition. You shouldn't let anyone else in. They're not for my condition, Daddy. They're causing my condition." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Richard's hands were shaking slightly and he seemed to age 10 years in 10 seconds. "I don't know what this doctor told you, but she told me the truth." Victoria's voice was stronger now. "She told me that my eyes are perfectly healthy, that I've been taking drugs that suppress my visual cortex, that my blindness is artificial." Richard stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. "Victoria, you don't understand. That's impossible. You were born blind. The specialist confirmed it." "Which specialist, Daddy?" "Because I've been thinking about my childhood and I'm starting to remember things differently." Richard began pacing the small room. "You're confused. This doctor, whoever she is, she's filled your head with impossible ideas." "I remember colors," Victoria said quietly. "I remember seeing your face when I was very little. I remember the garden, the way sunlight looked coming through the windows. Those are false memories. Your brain creating fantasies to compensate for—" "Stop lying to me." Victoria's voice cracked with emotion. "I remember, Daddy, I could see when I was little, couldn't I?" Richard collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. For several minutes, the only sound was his ragged breathing. "You have to understand," he said finally, his voice broken. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." Victoria felt her heart stop. "What wasn't supposed to happen?" "The charity," Richard whispered. "The Whitmore Foundation for the Blind. It started as a legitimate organization, but the tax benefits were enormous. The donations, the government grants, it was bringing in millions. I don't understand. But then the auditors started asking questions. They wanted to meet you, to verify that my disabled daughter really existed. So I brought you to events and everyone fell in love with you. The donations increased dramatically. Victoria's hands were clenched so tightly her nails were cutting into her palms. Go on. When you were 4, you started asking why you couldn't see like other children. You were beginning to understand that something was wrong. And I realized that if you developed normal vision, if people found out you weren't really blind, you'd go to prison for fraud." Richard nodded miserably. "I found a doctor who was willing to help. He said the medications would just slow your visual development temporarily, until I could figure out a better solution. But temporary became permanent, and before I knew it, years had passed. 22 years, Daddy. You stole 22 years of my life. I gave you a good life," Richard said desperately. "You've had everything money could buy. You've been loved and protected, and I've been a prisoner." Victoria stood up, her white cane falling to the floor. "I've been living in a cage made of lies and drugs and your greed." "Victoria, please, you have to understand. I couldn't stop. The foundation had grown too big. Too many people depended on it. If the truth came out, it would destroy everything. What about me? What about what it was doing to me?" Richard was crying now. "I told myself you were happy. You seemed content with your life. You never complained. Because I thought I had no choice. I thought this was just who I was." Victoria turned toward the door, her movements no longer careful and measured. Even without her cane, she seemed to navigate the room with new confidence. "Where are you going?" Richard asked. "To see Dr. Martinez, to start the process of getting my vision back." "Victoria, wait. If you expose this, everything will fall apart. The foundation employs hundreds of people. The research we fund, the people we help." Victoria paused at the door. "You should have thought of that before you decided to sacrifice your daughter for money. What are you going to do?" Victoria looked back toward her father, though she still couldn't see him clearly. "I'm going to learn what the world looks like, Daddy. I'm going to see colors and faces and sunsets and all the things you stole from me. And then I'm going to decide what to do about you." She left him sitting alone in the dining room, a broken man facing the consequences of choices he had made 2 decades earlier. As Victoria walked through the hotel lobby, she felt something she had never experienced before. The world around her seemed slightly brighter, as if a fog was beginning to lift. She couldn't see clearly yet, but for the first time in her adult life, she could sense light and shadow, movement and stillness. The medications were wearing off, and Victoria Whitmore was finally coming home to herself. But the hardest part was still ahead, learning to live in a world she had never really seen, and deciding what justice looked like for the man who had kept her in darkness for his own gain. The first thing Victoria truly saw was Keisha's face. It happened on a Tuesday morning. 5 days after she had stopped taking the medications, Victoria was sitting in Dr. Martinez's office for her daily vision assessment when the world suddenly shifted from shadows and blurs into something recognizable. "Keisha," Victoria whispered, staring at the young woman sitting beside her. "Is that really you?" Keisha's eyes filled with tears. "Can you see me?" "Your skin is darker than I imagined," Victoria said, reaching out tentatively to touch Keisha's cheek. "But your smile is exactly what I thought it would look like." Dr. Martinez documented everything as Victoria's vision continued to improve over the following days. Colors emerged slowly, first red, then blue, then the full spectrum of a world Victoria had been denied for 18 years. The process was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. "It's like being born," Victoria told Keisha as they sat in a small park near UCLA, watching children play on swings and slides. "Everything is new and bright and so much more complex than I ever imagined." Keisha had stayed in Los Angeles beyond her planned internship, using vacation time from school to help Victoria navigate this incredible transition. The two women had become inseparable, their friendship forged in the fire of truth and transformation. "What's that?" Victoria asked, pointing to a small yellow bird perched on a nearby bench. "A finch," Keisha said. "They're common in LA. It's so tiny and perfect. I never imagined birds would be so detailed. Every discovery was a miracle. The way light played on water, the expressions on people's faces, the vast blue of the sky." Victoria spent hours just looking at her own hands, marveling at the lines and colors and the way her fingers moved. But with the joy came decisions that were much more difficult. Richard Whitmore had been calling constantly, begging Victoria to meet with him again. Mrs. Patterson had been fired and sent back to New York. The family lawyers were in crisis mode, trying to understand the legal implications of what Richard had done. "Have you decided what you're going to do about your father?" Dr. Martinez asked during one of Victoria's appointments. "I think about it every day," Victoria admitted. "Part of me wants him to pay for what he did, but part of me remembers the father who read me stories and held me when I had nightmares." "Both of those things can be true," Dr. Martinez said gently. "People are complicated. What he did was terrible, but that doesn't erase the love he had for you." That afternoon, Victoria finally agreed to see her father again. They met in the same hotel dining room where she had confronted him a week earlier. But this time everything was different. This time Victoria could see his face. Richard looked terrible. He had lost weight. His clothes were wrinkled and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. When Victoria walked into the room without her white cane, moving with the confidence of someone who could see, he broke down completely. "Victoria," he whispered. "You can see." "Yes, Daddy, I can see." She sat across from him, studying his face, a face she was seeing clearly for the first time in her adult life. "I can see you." They sat in silence for several minutes, father and daughter looking at each other across a table there. It might as well have been an ocean. "I'm so sorry," Richard said finally. "I know that's not enough, but I need you to know how sorry I am." "Tell me why," Victoria said. "Help me understand how a father could do this to his child." Richard took a shaky breath. "It started small. The foundation was legitimate at first, but the regulations were complex and I cut some corners. Nothing that hurt anyone, just paperwork issues. But when the government started investigating, I panicked. So you used me as a cover." "At first, yes. But Victoria, the medications were supposed to be temporary, just until I could clean up the foundation's books and make everything legitimate again. But you didn't. The foundation grew so big, so fast. We were funding real research, helping real people. The donations kept pouring in because of you, because of your story. I convinced myself that the good we were doing outweighed destroying your daughter's life. Richard flinched. I told myself you were happy. You had everything you needed. You were educated, loved, cared for. I was imprisoned. Daddy, I was living half a life because you were too much of a coward to face the consequences of your mistakes. You're right. Richard's voice was broken. I was a coward. I am a coward. Victoria studied her father's face, seeing the lines of guilt and shame that had deepened over the years. The foundation? How much money are we talking about? Over the past 18 years? Nearly $200 million, Victoria felt sick. $200 million? But most of it went to legitimate research and programs. The amount I actually took was maybe $15 million? Maybe? $18 million. $18 million over 18 years. Victoria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city she was still learning to see. And now? Now I'll go to prison. The FBI is already investigating. It's only a matter of time. What about the people who work for the foundation? The research programs? They'll probably shut it all down. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs. Dozens of research projects will lose funding. Victoria closed her eyes, an action that now meant something completely different than it had a week ago. When she opened them, she had made a decision. Here's what's going to happen, she said, turning back to face her father. You're going to turn yourself in to the authorities. You're going to confess everything and cooperate fully with their investigation. Richard nodded miserably. But first, you're going to work with me to restructure the foundation. We're going to create a new organization with complete transparency and independent oversight. The legitimate research will continue, but it will be run by people who actually care about helping others, not about tax benefits. Victoria, that's generous, but I don't think I'm not finished. Victoria's voice was steel. You're going to use every penny of your personal wealth to compensate the foundation for the money you stole. Your houses, your cars, your investments, everything. Of course. And when you get out of prison, you're going to spend the rest of your life doing legitimate work for people with disabilities. Real work, not just writing checks and posing for photos. Richard looked up at his daughter with something that might have been hope. And you? What about us? Victoria was quiet for a long time. I don't know yet, Daddy. Ask me again in a few years. 3 months later, Victoria stood at the podium of a packed auditorium at UCLA Medical Center. She was wearing a simple blue dress. Blue had become her favorite color, and she could see every face in the audience clearly. My name is Victoria Whitmore, she began. And for 18 years, I lived in artificial darkness because of my father's crimes. The new Whitmore Foundation for Medical Justice had been established with Victoria as its president and Dr. Martinez as its chief medical officer. Keisha, who had transferred to UCLA to complete her nursing degree, served as the foundation's patient advocacy coordinator. But I'm not here today to talk about the past, Victoria continued. I'm here to talk about the future, about the importance of medical transparency, patient rights, and the need to question authority when something doesn't feel right. In the audience, she could see Keisha beaming with pride, Dr. Martinez nodding approvingly, reporters scribbling notes about the Foundation's new mission to prevent medical abuse and support victims of medical fraud. I was fortunate, Victoria said. I had someone who cared enough to ask difficult questions, someone who risked her own comfort to help a stranger. Not everyone is so lucky. After the presentation, Victoria and Keisha walked across the UCLA campus, enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. Any regrets? Keisha asked. Victoria thought about it. I regret the years I lost. I regret that it took so long to learn the truth. But I don't regret where I am now. Your father called yesterday, Keisha said carefully. From prison. Victoria had been avoiding her father's call since his sentencing 6 weeks earlier. What did he want? To tell you he's proud of what you're doing with the foundation, and to say he loves you. Victoria stopped walking and looked up at the sky, still amazed that she could see clouds and birds and the endless blue expanse above. I know he loves me, Keisha. That's what makes it so hard. You don't have to forgive him. I know, but maybe someday I will. Maybe someday I'll be able to separate the father who loved me from the man who betrayed me. They walked on in comfortable silence, Two young women who had found each other by chance and changed each other's lives forever. "Hey, Victoria," Keisha said as they reached the parking lot. "Yeah? What do you want to see next? I mean, what's still on your list of things you've never seen?" Victoria smiled, an expression that was even more beautiful now that she could see her own reflection. "The ocean at sunset. I want to see what happens when the sun disappears into the water." "That can be arranged," Keisha laughed. "But I have to warn you, it's even more amazing than you're imagining." "Everything is," Victoria said. "Everything is more amazing than I ever imagined." As they drove toward the Pacific coast, Victoria thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. A chance encounter on a turbulent flight had led to the most important discovery of her life. Sometimes truth came from the most unexpected places. Carried by the most unlikely messengers, she had lost 18 years to her father's lies, but she had gained something more valuable than time. She had gained the ability to see not just with her eyes, but with her heart and mind. She had learned that justice wasn't always about punishment, but sometimes about transformation and healing. And as the sun set over the Pacific Ocean in brilliant oranges and purples that took her breath away, Victoria Whitmore finally understood what it meant to truly see.